The following story is a translated and adapted conversation, recounting supernatural experiences from around the world. This content is intended for entertainment purposes only. Listen with an open mind and enjoy the thrill of the unknown. The content in this video is purely for entertainment. Viewer discretion is advised. If you are easily frightened, be prepared some stories might just send chills down your spine. If you're ready, turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and immerse yourself in the world of the unexplained.
The Dancer in the Rainy Night. In Thailand's northern province of Nan, where mist clings to jagged mountains and rivers carve through dense forests, the rains come hard and relentless. The locals know better than to linger on the winding, unpaved roads after dark, especially Route 1168, a narrow stretch flanked by bamboo groves and forgotten shrines. For decades, travelers have whispered of a figure seen in the downpour. A woman in a dancer's garb, her silhouette swaying as if to an unseen rhythm. She flags down cars, her presence fleeting, leaving behind only the scent of flowers and the echo of traditional Thai music. They call her Nang Ram Fontokhtha, Dancer in the Rainland. Her story is one of beauty, betrayal, and a restless soul bound to the storm. Legend says she was Lamoye, a nartaki from a traveling troupe in the 1960s, renowned for her grace in the Ram Thai dance. On a stormy night, her lover, a jealous musician, lured her to this road under the guise of eloping, only to strangle her in a fit of rage when she refused to abandon her craft for him. Her body was dumped in a roadside ditch, washed away by the floods, and never found. Since then, she haunts Route 1168, her spirit tied to the rain that hid her murder, seeking either solace or vengeance from those who cross her path. It was March 20th, 2025, when Thanet, a 32-year-old mechanic from Chiang Mai, found himself driving through Nan province. He was a practical man, broad-shouldered, calloused hands, with a nonsense air honed by years fixing engines. Thanet didn't believe in ghosts. He trusted what he could touch, what he could repair. But tonight, he was on edge. His younger brother, Golf, had called him in a panic that afternoon, begging him to come to Nan. Golf had crashed his motorbike on a back road, breaking his leg, and needed a ride home from a rural clinic. "I can't wait for an ambulance," he'd pleaded. "It's pouring, here, just hurry." Thanet cursed under his breath as he loaded his old pickup truck, a rusty Isuzu. He'd patched together himself with tools and a tarp. The 6-hour drive was a hassle he didn't need, but family was family. He set out at dusk, the sky already bruising with storm clouds. By the time he reached the outskirts of Nan, rain hammered the windshield, the wipers struggling against the deluge. Route 1168 stretched before him, a slick ribbon of mud and gravel, its edges blurred by water. His headlights carved a weak path through the dark, and the radio crackled with static, unable to hold a signal. Thanet gripped the wheel, his jaw tight. He hated driving in storms, too many variables, too little control. The clock read 10:47 p.m., and exhaustion tugged at his eyes. "Almost there," he muttered, though the GPS had lost its way miles back. He felt isolated, the world shrinking to the roar of rain and the thud of his heartbeat. Then, through the blur of water, he saw her. She stood at the road's edge, a lone silhouette against the swaying bamboo. Thanet squinted, slowing the truck. A woman, drenched and motionless, her arm raised as if hailing him. She wore an odd outfit, flowing fabric that shimmered faintly, a headdress glinting despite the dark. A dancer, he thought, confusion cutting through his fatigue. No one sane would be out here in this weather, yet there she was, unwavering as the rain lashed her. He hesitated. Common sense screamed to keep driving strangers on back roads. Spelled trouble, but a pang of guilt stopped him. What if she's hurt? He reasoned, picturing Golf stranded and helpless. He pulled over, tires squelching in the mud, and rolled down the window. Rain stung his face as he shouted, "Hey, you okay? Need a lift?" She didn't answer. Instead, she glided toward the truck, her movements eerily smooth, like a puppet on strings. Thanet's gut twisted, a flicker of unease he couldn't place. Up close, her chador headdress sparkled with wet gold. Her fastened skirt clung to her legs, and her face pale, too pale, remained shadowed. "Get in," he called, louder now, over the storm's roar. She nodded, a slow, deliberate motion, and slipped into the back seat without opening the door. Thanet blinked, his mind scrambling. Must have missed it, he told himself, though his hands shook as he shifted gears. The cab filled with a faint scent jasmine, sweet and cloying, cutting through the damp musk of rain. He glanced in the rearview mirror, but the angle was wrong. He couldn't see her face. "Where you headed?" he asked, forcing calm into his voice. Silence, only the patter of rain and the hum of the engine answered. He swallowed, unease growing into a cold knot in his chest. Thanet drove on, the road twisting through the storm. The silence gnawed at him, heavier than the rain. He tried again. "You, from around here. What's with the costume?" No reply. A chill crept up his spine, and he risked another glance in the mirror. The seat was emptier, so it seemed. A flicker of movement caught his eye, a shadow shifting where she should be. His heart lurched. "Focus on the road," he muttered, gripping the wheel tighter. Then it began a soft, rhythmic sound, barely audible over the rain. Ching-ching, like cymbals tapped in time. Thanet's breath hitched. The sound grew, joined by the mournful wail of a painai, weaving a melody that felt both beautiful and wrong. It came from inside the truck, from behind him. "What the hell?" he whispered, his voice cracking. The jasmine scent thickened, cloying now, suffocating, and the air turned cold, his breath fogging in the cab. He slammed on the brakes, the truck skidding to a stop. "Who's there?" he shouted, twisting around. The back seat was empty, no woman, no dancer, just his tarp and toolbox. Relief washed over him, tinged with confusion. Losing it, he laughed shakily, rubbing his eyes. But as he turned back, the music swelled, deafening now, and the mirror showed her sitting there, staring at him. Her face was a nightmare. Eyes black and hollow, skin dripping, wet and grey, lips curled in a faint, eerie smile. Thanet screamed, a raw sound torn from his throat, and fumbled for the door. The locks clicked shut on their own, trapping him inside. The dancer leaned forward, her cold fingers brushing his neck. Thanet thrashed, slamming his elbow against the window, but it wouldn't break. The music pulsed, a frenzied ramtie rhythm, and the cab seemed to shrink, the walls pressing in. Her voice slithered into his mind, not heard but felt, a whisper of silk and venom. "You stopped for me, now you see me." Images flooded his vision. Lam Yai laughing with her troop, her lover's hands tightening round her throat, the rain swallowing her screams. Thanet felt her pain, her rage, a weight that crushed his chest. "I didn't do this," he yelled, tears streaming down his face. "Let me go." But she tilted her head, her smile widening, and the truck shook as if caught in a tempest. The dashboard lights flickered, the engine sputtered, and the scent of jasmine turned rancid decay, blood, wet earth. Thanet's hands clawed at the wheel, his mind unraveling. He saw her in the mirrors, now dozens of her, reflections dancing in sync, their hollow eyes locked on him. The truck jolted forward, moving on its own, tires spinning through the mud as she guided it deeper into the night. Terror gave way to despair. Golf, he thought, guilt stabbing him. He'd never reach his brother, never fix this. The dancer's touch spread, a numbness creeping up his arms, and he felt himself slipping, his body swaying to her rhythm, his will eroding. No, 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 he sobbed. But the music drowned him, pulling him into her dance. Hours bled together, or minutes. Time dissolved in the storm. Thanet's strength faded, his shouts reduced to whimpers. Then, abruptly, the music stopped. The truck halted, the locks clicked open, and the dancer was gone. Warmth seeped back into the cab, the jasmine scent fading to a faint memory. Thanet sat, trembling, staring at the empty back seat. His flashlight lay there, untouched, beside a single wet petal. He stumbled out, rain soaking him instantly, and checked the truck. No signs of her, no footprints, no marks only, the petal and the echo of ching-ching in his ears. He drove on, autopilot guiding him to the clinic, where Golf waited, pale but alive. "What took you so long?" Golf asked, but Thanet couldn't answer. His throat burned, his mind replayed her face, and his hands wouldn't stop shaking. Back in Chiang Mai, Thanet tried to forget. He fixed cars, avoided rain, and told no one, not even Golf, what happened. But the nights betrayed him. He'd wake to the sound of Pai Nai, the smell of jasmine, and the sensation of cold fingers on his neck. A rash appeared thin, wet lines like strangulation, marks fading by day, returning by night. One evening, driving home in a drizzle, he saw her again standing on the roadside, her headdress glinting. He sped past, heart racing, but the music followed, faint and persistent. Lamaye had seen him, claimed him, and the rain would always bring her back. The Dancer of the Abandoned Palace. In the province of Ratchaburi, Thailand, where rolling hills meet tangled jungles, there lies a relic of a bygone era. The Pra Nekon Kiri, Palasaur, what remains of it. Once a summer retreat for royalty during the reign of King Rama IV, its grandeur has long faded, swallowed by time and neglect. Locals call it Wongro, the abandoned palace, a sprawling maze of crumbling walls, overgrown courtyards and shadowed halls. Few dare to approach it after dusk, for whispers of a tragic tale cling to its stones, tale of a dancer, beloved and betrayed, whose spirit refuses to rest. Her name was Nang Phim, an Ataki court dancer of unparalleled grace, favored by the palace's lord, Chow Freya Sharia Wong. But beauty and favor bred envy. Legend says she was murdered in a fit of jealous rage by a rival concubine, her body left to rot in a hidden chamber. The killer was never found, and the palace, stained by her blood, was abandoned soon after. For over a century, villagers have claimed to hear faint strains of traditional Thai music Pai, fat ensembles of Ranot Ek and Kongwong drifting from the ruins, accompanied by the silhouette of a dancer swaying in the moonlight. Those who linger too long speak of a face marred by wounds, a gaze that pierces the soul, and a presence that promises no peace. It was March 20th, 2025, when Krit, a 28-year-old freelance photographer from Bangkok, first heard of Wang Ro. He was no stranger to the macabre. His portfolio brimmed with images of derelict temples, forgotten cemeteries, and haunted bridges, each frame capturing the beauty of decay. His latest obsession was urban exploration, fueled by a restless need to uncover the unseen. Krit wasn't a believer in ghosts, but he thrived on the adrenaline of trespassing where others feared to tread. The palace, with its dark history, was his next target. The idea came from a late-night scroll through a Thai ghost story forum. A user named Shadow Seeker had posted a grainy photo of Wong Rao's courtyard, claiming to have heard music and seen a figure in a window. The thread exploded with warnings. Don't go alone, she'll follow you home. The dancer doesn't forgive intruders. But Crit dismissed them as superstition. He felt a thrill, a tingling in his chest that mingled excitement with defiance. Armed with his Nikon camera, a flashlight, and a backpack of supplies, he set out for Ratchaburi, determined to document the palace's secrets. The drive from Bangkok was long and uneventful, the highway giving way to winding rural roads flanked by rice paddies and looming hills. Crit's mind buzzed with anticipation, though a faint unease gnawed at him. He'd told no one where he was going. Not his sister, not his editor, just left a vague note. Out on a shoot, back in a few days. As the sun dipped low, painting the sky in hues of orange and violet, he arrived at the base of Khao Wang Hill, where the palace perched like a silent sentinel. The air was thick with humidity as Crit parked his battered Toyota at the foot of the hill. A faded sign warned trespassers away, but the path a cracked stone stairway, overgrown with moss, beckoned him upward. He adjusted his backpack, the weight of his gear grounding him, and began the climb. The forest pressed in close, its canopy blocking the last rays of daylight. Cicadas screeched in a deafening chorus, and the scent of damp earth filled his lungs. Every few steps, he paused to snap photos, a broken railing, a gnarled tree root piercing the stone, a lizard skittering into the undergrowth. Halfway up, Crit felt a shift. The cicadas fell silent, replaced by a stillness so profound it pressed against his eardrums. He stopped, heart thudding, and glanced around. Nothing moved, not a leaf, not a breeze. Just my imagination, he muttered, forcing a laugh that sounded hollow. He checked his watch. 7:14 p.m. Night had fully descended, and the beam of his flashlight carved a frail path through the gloom. As he neared the palace gates, a faint sound reached Hima, rhythmic tapping like bamboo striking bamboo. He froze, straining to listen. It grew clearer, the melodic chime of a Renat Ek, the wooden xylophone of Thai classical music, joined by the mournful wail of a painai. Crit's pulse quickened. Someone's up there, he thought, though reason argued otherwise. The palace had been abandoned for decades. No electricity, no residents. Curiosity overpowered caution, and he pressed on, the music guiding him like a siren's call. The gates loomed ahead, rusted iron twisted into ornate patterns, now choked with vines. Crit pushed them open, wincing at the groan of metal, and stepped into the courtyard. The palace sprawled before him, its tiled roofs sagging, its walls stained black by mold. Broken statues of Garudas and Nagas flanked the entrance, their stone eyes watching him with eerie indifference. The music swelled, echoing off the stones, though its source remained elusive. Crit's flashlight swept the scene, illuminating shattered tiles and creeping ivy. He felt exposed, a trespasser in a place that didn't welcome the living. Yet the photographer in him took over click, 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 capturing the decay in sharp detail. "This is gold," he whispered, adrenaline masking the growing chill in his spine. He ventured deeper, past a collapsed pavilion and into the main hall, where shadows danced in the corners of his vision. The hall was vast, its ceiling lost to darkness, its floor littered with debris. A faded mural of celestial dancers adorned one wall, their painted smiles uncanny in the gloom. Crit's breath caught as the music shifted faster now, urgent, the tempo of a ram-wanged dance. He turned, expecting to find nothing, but his beam landed on something that stopped his heart. Footprints, bare, Wet and impossibly delicate, they trailed across the dusty floor, leading toward a narrow corridor. "Who's there?" he called, his voice trembling despite himself. No answer came, only the relentless music. Crit's mind raced pranksters, squatters, but his gut screamed otherwise. He followed the prints, each step heavier than the last, his flashlight shaking in his grip. The corridor twisted deeper into the palace, its walls closing in, the air growing colder. Crit's breath fogged before him, a stark contrast to the humid night outside. The footprints ended at a heavy teak door, its surface carved with lotus motifs, its edges splintered as if clawed at. The music pulsed from within, now joined by a soft, rhythmic tapping, bare feet on wood, moving in time with the melody. Crit's hand hovered over the door. Fear clawed at him, a primal urge to flee, but his stubborn pride held firm. "I've come this far," he thought, swallowing hard. He pushed the door open, and the hinges shrieked like a dying animal. The room beyond was small, a chamber untouched by time. Silk tapestries hung in tatters. A low altar bore faded offerings, wilted flowers. Broken incense stick sand in the center stood a figure. She was a vision from another era, a Nartaki in full regalia. Her chador headdress glittered with dulled gold, her silk fasin shimmered faintly, and her arms moved with liquid grace, tracing the arcs of a traditional dance. Crit stood transfixed, awe warring with terror. She was beautiful until she turned. Her face was a ruin. Deep gashes crisscrossed her cheeks, oozing black ichor that dripped onto her chest. Her eyes were hollow pits, yet they burned with a malevolent light, locking onto him. Her lips parted in a smile, too wide, revealing jagged teeth stained with blood. The music crescendoed, a cacophony of clashing notes, and Crit's knees buckled. "Who? What are you?" he stammered, stumbling back. The dancer didn't speak. She glided forward, her feet hovering an inch above the floor, her movements unnaturally smooth. Crit's flashlight flickered, casting her shadow in jagged bursts across the walls, a shadow that stretched far beyond her form, clawing at the ceiling. Panic seized him. He turned to run, but the door slammed shut with a force that rattled his bones. The air thickened, pressing against his chest, and a voice not heard but felt, deep in his skull, whispered, "You saw me, now you stay." Crit pounded on the door, his fists bruising against the unyielding wood. The room grew frigid, his breath coming in sharp gasps. The dancer circled him, her dance unbroken, her wounded face inches from his. He could smell her rotting flowers, old blood decaying. His stomach churned. "I'm sorry," he cried, though he didn't know what for. "I didn't mean to." Her head tilted, an unnatural angle, and the whispering intensified, a chorus of voices overlapping in rage and sorrow. Crit's flashlight died, plunging the room into darkness, save for the faint glow of her headdress. He fumbled for his camera, instinct driving him to document the impossible, but the lens refused to focus. Each shot a blur of light and shadow. The tapping of her feet grew louder, faster, a staccato that matched his racing heart. He felt her presence behind him, her cold fingers brushing his neck, and he screamed a raw, guttural sound that echoed in the confined space. The walls seemed to pulse, the tapestries writhing as if alive, and the altar trembled, spilling its offerings onto the floor. Crit sank to his knees, clutching his head. Memories flashed unbidden, his childhood fear of the dark, his mother's warnings about spirits, the forum posts he'd scoffed at. Regret flooded him, bitter and suffocating. "I shouldn't have come here," he thought, tears streaming down his face. The dancer loomed over him, her smile widening until it split her face, and he felt a puller-draining sensation, as if his very essence was being siphoned away. Hours passed or minutes. Time lost meaning in that chamber. Crit's strength waned, his body heavy, his mind fogged with despair. Yet a spark of defiance flickered. "I won't die here," he growled, forcing himself to stand. He groped for the door, fingers scraping splinters, and threw his weight against it. The wood creaked, then gave way, spilling him into the corridor. The music followed, relentless, as he staggered through the palace. Shadows twisted around him, hands reaching from the walls, but he ran blindly, desperately toward the courtyard. The dancers' laughter rang out, a sound like breaking glass, and he felt her breath on his neck, her nails grazing his back. "No, no, no," he sobbed, tripping over debris, his knees bloodying on the stone. He burst into the open air, the night sky a stark relief. The music faded, the presence receding, but Crit didn't stop. He stumbled down the hill, branches tearing at his skin, until he reached his car. Hands shaking, he fumbled the keys, started the engine, and sped away, the palace shrinking in his rearview mirror. Crit made it back to Bangkok, but he was not the same. Sleep eluded him. Every night, he heard the faint chime of a Ranatek, saw her wounded face in his dreams. His photos from Wong Ro were corrupted except one, a single frame of the dancer, her eyes staring through the lens into him. He burned the memory card, but the image lingered in his mind. Weeks later, a rash appeared on his neck thin, red lines like claw marks. Doctors couldn't explain it, but Crit knew. Nang Phim had marked him, a reminder of his intrusion. He abandoned photography, retreating to a quiet life, but the whispers never stopped. "You saw me, now you stay." The abandoned palace stands still, its halls echoing with her dance, waiting for the next fool to cross its threshold. The shadow in the mirror. Nestled deep within the untamed forests of northern Thailand, far from the hum of city life, lay the village of Ban Phakar. It was a place forgotten by time, where the trees grew so thick they swallowed the sunlight, and the air carried a perpetual dampness that clung to the skin. The villagers were a quiet folk, bound by traditions and unspoken rules, their lives governed by the cycles of rice planting and the whispers of the spirits they believed lingered in the shadows. Among the weathered wooden houses stood one that drew more hushed tales than any other, the home of Grandma Samniang. Grandma Samniang was an enigma, wiry old woman with sharp eyes and a voice that rasped like dry leaves. She lived alone in a creaking two-story house at the edge of the village, its walls stained black by decades of monsoon rains. The villagers often spoke of strange occurrences there, footsteps echoing in the dead of night, faint murmurs drifting through the walls, and shadowy figures glimpsed in the windows when the moon hung low. Samniang dismissed it all with a wave of her gnarled hand, insisting she lived alone. But the villagers knew better. They avoided her home after dusk, and no one dared ask about the locked room at the back of the house, or the ancient mirror said to reside within it. It was March 2025 when Kao, a 17-year-old girl from Bangkok, arrived in Ban Phakar. She was a city child through and through, with long dark hair, bright eyes, and a restless energy that clashed with the village's stillness. Her parents had sent her to live with Grandma Samniang, her maternal grandmother, after a messy divorce left their family fractured. Kao wasn't thrilled about trading neon lights and bustling streets for a remote village where the only sounds were crickets and the occasional barking dog. But she had no choice. She arrived with a single suitcase, her phone useless without signal, and a simmering curiosity about the grandmother she barely knew. Samniang greeted her with a curt nod and a bowl of sticky rice. "You'll sleep upstairs," she said, her voice low and gravelly. "Don't wander at night. The house is old, it creaks." Cow nodded, sensing the weight behind the words but too tired to question them. That first night, she lay in her narrow bed, listening to the symphony of the forest outside. The wind rattled the shutters, and the floorboards groaned as if the house itself were restless. She drifted into an uneasy sleep, dreaming of a figure standing at the foot of her bed, its face obscured by shadow. The next morning, Cal met some of the village kids while fetching water from the communal well. They were a shy bunch, but one boy, Chai, a wiry 12-year-old with a gap-toothed grin, was bold enough to speak. "You're staying with Grandma Samniang?" he asked wide-eyed. "Don't you know about her house?" "What about it?" Cal replied, intrigued. Chai lowered his voice. "They say there's something in there with her, something that watches. My uncle saw a shadow in the window once, but Grandma was out in the fields. And then there's the mirror." "What mirror?" Cal pressed. "In the back room. It's older than the village, maybe. They say it doesn't just show you, it shows something else, something that shouldn't be there." Chai shivered, though the morning sun was warm. "No one's supposed to go in that room. Grandma keeps it locked." Cal laughed it off, chalking it up to rural superstition. But as she walked back to the house, Chai's words lingered, planting a seed of curiosity that refused to fade. Days turned into weeks, and Cal settled into a routine of helping Samniang with chores, feeding the chickens, tending the vegetable patch, and hauling water from the well. The house, though old, had a strange charm. Faded photographs hung crookedly on the walls. A rickety staircase led to the upper floor, and every corner seemed to hold a story. But the back room remained a mystery. Its door, made of heavy teak, was always locked with an iron padlock that looked older than Cow herself. She asked Samniang about it once, casually, over dinner. "What's in that room, Grandma?" Samniang's spoon paused mid-air. "Nothing you need to worry about," she said sharply. "Just storage, old junk. Stay out of it." Her tone left no room for argument, but it only fueled Kai's growing obsession. Late one afternoon, while Samniang was napping, Cow crept downstairs with a hairpin she'd found in her suitcase. She'd seen enough movies to know how to pick a lock, or so she thought. Kneeling before the door, she fumbled with the padlock, her heart pounding. The house was silent, save for the faint ticking of a clock in the living room. After several frustrating minutes, the lock clicked open. She hesitated, glancing over her shoulder, then pushed the door ajar. In the far corner, draped with a stained white sheet, stood the object Chai had mentioned. The mirror. It was taller than Cow. Its wooden frame carved with intricate patterns that might have been beautiful once, but were now weathered and chipped. She approached it slowly, her sandals scuffing against the warped floorboards. With a trembling hand, she pulled the sheet away. The mirror's surface was cloudy, streaked with scratches and faint discoloration, but it still reflected her image clearly. Her long hair, her wide eyes, the white tank top she wore. She stared at herself, feeling a chill despite the humid air. Then something shifted. Her reflection blinked, though she hadn't. A slow, unnatural smile spread across its face, stretching wider than her own mouth ever could. Cow stumbled back, her breath catching in her throat. "What the hell?" she whispered. She blinked hard, hoping it was a trick of the light, but when she looked again, the smile was gone. Her reflection stared back, normal once more. Shaken, she grabbed the sheet to cover the mirror. But as she turned to leave, a faint sound stopped her whisper, soft and guttural, like wind through dry grass. "Cow." She froze. The voice had come from behind her, from the mirror. She didn't dare turn around. Instead, she bolted from the room, slamming the door shut and fumbling to snap the padlock back into place. Her hands shook so badly she dropped the hairpin twice before succeeding. That night, Cow couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the incident in her mind. Had she imagined it? The villagers' superstitions were getting to her, she reasoned. Old houses made noises. Mirrors played tricks. Still, when she closed her eyes, she saw that unnatural smile, and the whisper echoed in her ears. Around midnight, she heard it again, not from her memory, but from the house itself. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, creaking along the hallway downstairs. She sat up, clutching her blanket. The sound paused, then resumed, growing louder as it approached the stairs. Thud, thud, thud. Each step reverberated through the wooden frame of the house. Kai's heart raced. She wanted to call out to Samniang, whose room was across the hall, but her voice caught in her throat. The footsteps stopped at the base of the stairs. Silence stretched on, heavy and suffocating. Then, a new sound, a low, rhythmic tapping, like fingernails on wood. It came from the direction of the back room. Cal pulled the blanket over her head, praying it would stop. Eventually, it did, and she drifted into a fitful sleep, plagued by nightmares of a faceless figure standing before a mirror, its mouth gaping in a silent scream. The next morning, she confronted Samniang over breakfast. "Grandma, I heard something last night." Footsteps, tapping. It was coming from that room. Samniang's face tightened. She set her bowl down and fixed Cow with a piercing stare. "I told you not to bother with that room. You didn't go in there, did you?" Cow hesitated, then lied. "No, I just heard things." Samniang's eyes narrowed, but she said nothing more. "Old houses make noises," she muttered, echoing Kai's own excuse. "Ignore it." But Cow couldn't ignore it. That evening, while Samniang was at a neighbor's, she returned to the back room. She had to know if it was real. Armed with a flashlight from the kitchen, she unlocked the door again and stepped inside. The mirror stood as before, uncovered now, its surface gleaming faintly in the beam of light. She steeled herself and looked into it. Her reflection stared back, normal at first. Then, its head tilted slightly in movement she hadn't made. The eyes darkened, the pupils shrinking to pinpoints, and the mouth twisted into that same grotesque smile. Kai's stomach dropped. Before she could react, the reflection raised a hand, pressing it against the inside of the glass. The mirror rippled like water, and a bony, withered hand began to emerge, its nails long and yellowed. Cow screamed and swung the flashlight, striking the mirror. The glass cracked with a sound like breaking ice, and the hand recoiled. She ran, locking the door behind her, and hid in her room until Samniang returned. The next day, Cow couldn't keep it in any longer. She told Samniang everything, the reflection, the voice, the hand. Her grandmother listened in stony silence, her face growing paler with each word. When Cow finished, Samniang sighed, a sound heavy with resignation. "You shouldn't have gone in there," she said. "That mirror, it's not just a mirror, it's a door." "A door," Cow echoed, incredulous. "To where?" "To something we don't understand. Something old. Older than me, older than this village. My mother, your great-grandmother, she brought it here. Said it was a gift from a traveling monk, but I never believed that. She used to talk to it, late at night. said it showed her things. After she died, I locked it away. I thought that would be the end of it. What's in there, Grandma? Kai's voice trembled. Samniang shook her head. I don't know. A spirit, maybe. Or something worse. It's been quiet for years until you came. Kao felt a pang of guilt. What do? We don't do anything, Samniang snapped. You stay away from it. I'll deal with it. But Samniang's dealing with it amounted to little more than muttering prayers and sprinkling salt around the house. The disturbances grew worse. Shadows moved in the corners of Kai's vision. The tapping became scratching, then pounding. One night, she woke to find her bedroom door ajar, though she'd locked it. Footprints bare, wet, and impossibly small trailed from her bed to the stairs. A week later, Kao decided she couldn't take it anymore. She had to destroy the mirror. While Samniang was out, she gathered a hammer from the shed and marched to the back room. The air inside was colder than before, the mirror's cracked surface glinting ominously. Her reflection was absent now. Instead, a figure stood in the glass, a woman, ancient and gaunt, her hair a tangle of white, her eyes milky and blind. Her mouth stretched into a grin that split her face, revealing rows of jagged teeth. Cow, the figure hissed, its voice echoing inside her skull. You opened the door, now you belong to us. Cow raised the hammer and swung with all her strength. The mirror shattered, shards flying everywhere, and a gust of frigid air erupted from the frame. The figure vanished, but the room filled with whispers, dozens, hundreds of voices overlapping in a cacophony of rage and despair. Cow dropped the hammer and ran, locking the door behind her. When Samniang returned, she found Cow curled up in the kitchen, pale and trembling. The older woman went to the back room, saw the broken mirror, and cursed under her breath. You've let it out, she said. It's not trapped anymore. The disturbances didn't stop. The footsteps grew louder, the shadows bolder. Objects moved on their own cups, sliding across tables, doors slamming shut. Cow refused to enter the back room again, but she felt its presence everywhere. At night, she'd wake to the sensation of being watched, and once she glimpsed a figure at the edge of her bed, tall, thin, and smiling. Samniang tried to appease whatever had been unleashed, leaving offerings of rice and incense, but it only seemed to grow stronger. The villagers began to notice 2 dogs howled at the house. Children refused to pass by. Cow begged to leave, but Samniang insisted they stay. It's tied to us now, she said. Running won't help. Months later, Cow sat on the porch, staring into the darkening forest. The air was still, but she felt it a gaze, unblinking and eternal, watching her from somewhere unseen. She knew it would never leave. The mirror was gone, but what it had held was free, and it had claimed her as its own. The dancers of the old school auditorium, in the heart of Thailand's northeastern Aisin region, where the land stretches flat and endless under a merciless sun, stands Ban Pho Tak School, a boarding institution once bustling with life. Decades ago, it was a beacon of education for rural children, its red-tiled roofs and wooden dormitories a symbol of hope amid the rice fields. But time and neglect have taken their toll. Most of its buildings now lean warily, overtaken by weeds and whispers of the past. At its edge lies the old auditorium, a cavernous structure of weathered teak and cracked concrete, abandoned since a fire claimed it in the 1970s. The auditorium was once the pride of the school, a stage for traditional Thai performances where students trained as Nartokis dancers of classical Kon and Lakon. Legend tells of a troop of girls, the finest Nang Ram the school had ever seen, who vanished in that fire. Their deaths were sudden, their bodies never fully accounted for, and the cause of the blaze remains a mystery. Some say it was an accidental lantern tipped over during a late rehearsal. Others whisper of darker truths, jealousy, sabotage, or a teacher's wrath gone too far. Since then, the auditorium has stood silent, or so it seems. Students and locals swear they hear the chime of Qing small cymbals on windless nights, and shadowy figures dance within its walls, only to vanish when approached. It was late March 2025 when Pim, a 16-year-old girl from Udon Thani, arrived at Ban Pho Tak School. She was a reluctant transfer student, sent by her struggling parents to board there after their farm failed. Pim was quiet but sharp-eyed, her long black hair often tied back in a practical braid. She carried little with her duffel bag, a worn notebook, and a lingering resentment toward the dusty, isolated place she now called home. With her came Tun, her cousin, a lanky boy of 17 with a mischievous streak and a habit of poking into things he shouldn't. Tun had begged to join her, claiming he'd rather face boarding school than his strict father's endless lectures. Their first day was uneventful, stifling classrooms, bland rice porridge, and stern teachers barking rules. But as dusk fell, the other students grew restless, whispering about the auditorium. "Don't go near it after dark," a girl named Noi warned, her voice low as they sat in the dormitory. "The Nangram are still there. They don't like strangers." Pim rolled her eyes. She'd heard ghost stories before, and they never scared her. Tun, though, grinned, his curiosity piqued. "Sounds like fun," he said, nudging Pim. "Wanna check it out?" "No way," she snapped, though a flicker of intrigue stirred in her chest. She hated admitting it, but Tun's reckless energy was infectious. That night, as the dorm fell quiet, she lay awake, the seed of adventure taking root. By the third night, Tun's pestering wore her down. "Come on, Pim," he whispered from his bunk across the hall, just a peek. "If it's nothing, I'll owe you a soda." The moon hung low, casting silver light through the cracked windows, and the air buzzed with the hum of crickets. Pim sighed, her resolve crumbling. "Fine, but if we get caught, it's your fault." They slipped out of the dorm, barefoot to muffle their steps. The cool earth beneath their feet, a stark contrast to the day's heat. The school grounds were eerily still, the silhouettes of tamarind trees swaying faintly. The auditorium loomed ahead, its silhouette jagged against the night sky, its double doors sealed with a rusted chain. Tun pulled a hairpin from Pim's braid. "Borrowing this," he said, with a wink, and set to work on the lock. Pim's heart thudded, a mix of annoyance and nervous excitement. "This is stupid," she muttered, glancing over her shoulder. The chain clattered to the ground, and Tun pushed the doors open. A wave of stale air rushed out, thick with the scent of mold and charred wood. Pim hesitated, her bravado faltering, but Tun grabbed her wrist and pulled her inside. "Too late to chicken out now," he teased. She glared but followed, her flashlight trembling in her hand. The auditorium was a tomb of shadows. Their beams cut through the dark, revealing rows of splintered benches, a collapsed stage, and walls blackened by old fire. Cobwebs draped the rafters like funeral shrouds, and the floor creaked underfoot, groaning with every step. Pim felt a chill, though the night was warm and her skin prickled as if watched. "This place is creepy," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the distant drone of frogs. Tun, undeterred, climbed onto the stage, kicking up clouds of dust. "Imagine performing here," he said, striking a mock dance pose. Pim forced a laugh, but it died in her throat as a sound pierced the silence, a faint, metallic ching-ching like cymbals tapped in rhythm. They froze, eyes wide. "Did you hear that?" Ton asked, his grin fading. "It's just the wind," Pim said, though no breeze stirred the heavy air. The sound came again, clearer now, joined by the soft thud of a taffin drum. Her stomach twisted. "Ton, let's go." But he was already moving toward the back of the stage, where a curtain hung in tatters. "Wait, look at this," he called, pointing to the floor. Footprints, small, bare, and fresh dotted the dust, leading behind the curtain. Pim's breath hitched. "No one's been here in years," she said, her voice shaking. Ton's bravado wavered, but he pushed the curtain aside, revealing a narrow stairwell descending into darkness. The music grew louder, a haunting melody of kongwong gongs and painai pipes, pulling them downward like a thread. "We have to see," Ton said, his curiosity outweighing his fear. Pim wanted to scream at him, to drag him back, but her legs moved against her will, following him into the abyss. The stairs spiraled into a basement Pim hadn't known existed, a rehearsal room. Its walls lined with cracked mirrors, its floor scorched black. The air was frigid, heavy with the stench of ash and something sweeter, like rotting jasmine. The music swelled, a full pie fat ensemble now, its notes sharp and discordant. Pim's flashlight flickered, casting jagged shadows, and Tun's bravado crumbled. "What the hell is this?" he whispered, clutching her arm. Before she could answer, the mirrors lit up not with their reflections, but with figures. Dozens of girls, clad in shimmering fascine skirts and golden chador headdresses, materialized in the glass. They moved in unison, their arms arching gracefully, their feet tapping the unseen floor in perfect rhythm. Pim's heart pounded, awe and terror colliding. They were beautiful until they turned. Their faces were charred, skin peeling away to reveal bone, eyes sunken and glowing faintly red. Some grinned with lipless mouths, others wept black tears that stained their chests. The mirrors rippled, and the dancers stepped out, their forms solidifying in the room. Pim screamed, dropping her flashlight, but Ton stood rooted, his face pale. "Pim, they're real," he choked out. The dancers surrounded them, their movements hypnotic yet menacing. The air pulsed with their rhythm, the ching-ching deafening now, drowning out Pim's cries. She felt trapped, her body swaying involuntarily to the beat, as if drawn into their dance. Ton grabbed her hand, pulling her back, but the dancers closed in, their cold fingers brushing her skin, easy, clammy, wrong. One dancer stepped forward, taller than the rest, her headdress adorned with wilted flowers. Her face was the worst half burned, half intact, a grotesque mask of beauty and ruin. She raised a hand and the music stopped, leaving a silence that crushed Pim's chest. The dancer's voice rasped, dry as ash. "You came to us. Now you join us." Pim's mind reeled. "We didn't mean to," she stammered, but the dancer cut her off, her hollow eyes boring into her. "We burned, we waited. You woke us." Images flooded Pim's mind, girls laughing as they rehearsed, a lantern flickering, a scream as flames erupted, a teacher fleeing as the troupe perished. Jealousy had sparked the fire, a rival's revenge against the favored dancers, and their spirits had lingered, bound to the auditorium by rage and sorrow. Ton sobbed, his bravado shattered. I'm sorry," he cried, but the dancers tightened their circle, their hands clawing at the air. Pim felt a pull, a draining sensation, as if her warmth was seeping into them. Her legs buckled, her vision blurring, and she saw herself in the mirrors dancing with them, her face beginning to char. Desperation surged through Pim. "No," she shouted, shoving Tun toward the stairs. The dancers lunged, their nails raking her arms, but she fought, dragging Tun upward. The music resumed, a frenzied tempo that shook the walls, dust raining from the ceiling. They stumbled into the auditorium, the dancers' laughter a high, keening well chasing them. Pim's flashlight was gone, but moonlight streamed through broken windows, guiding them to the doors. They burst outside, collapsing onto the grass as the doors slammed shut behind them. The music faded, replaced by the chirping of crickets, but Pim's heart wouldn't slow. Tun clutched her, tears streaming down his face. "What were they?" he whispered. Pim couldn't answer, her throat burned, her body ached, and a cold dread settled in her bones. She'd felt them, their pain, their hunger, and she knew they hadn't let go. Back in the dorm, Pim and Tun swore never to speak of that night. But the marks remained, faint burns on their arms, unexplainable to the school nurse. Sleep brought nightmares of dancing in flames, of faces peeling away. The other students noticed their silence, their haunted eyes, and the rumors grew. Weeks later, Pim heard it again, the ching-ching, faint but unmistakable, drifting from the auditorium. She looked out her window and saw them, shadows swaying in the moonlight, waiting. Tun refused to look, burying himself in his blankets, but Pim knew they'd seen her, they'd claimed her, and one day they'd call her back to dance.